Stop. Just stop for a moment. Take a breath. And before you scroll away, ask yourself one simple question. What if the life you keep waiting for is not somewhere far ahead of you? What if the shift you have been asking for has already started, but you have been looking for it in the wrong place? You may have noticed something lately. Certain people don't feel the same anymore. Old conversations feel empty. Places you once wanted to stay suddenly feel too small. And sometimes, for no clear reason, you wake up with the strange feeling that something is about to change. You cannot explain it. You cannot prove it. But you can feel it. And here's where it gets interesting. What if that feeling is not the beginning of the change? What if it is the signal that you are already changing? You see, when people hear the words quantum shift, they often imagine something impossible happening overnight. A door suddenly appearing, money arriving out of nowhere, a completely different life appearing in front of them. But the deeper idea is much more powerful than that. A shift begins when the way you see yourself starts changing, because the moment your inner world changes, your choices change. And when your choices change, your direction changes. That is where everything begins. Think about a radio for a moment. The room may contain hundreds of signals at the same time, but you only hear the frequency you are tuned to. Your life can work in a similar way. Possibilities may already exist around you that you cannot recognize yet, not because they are invisible, but because you are not looking at them through the same version of yourself. And this is the part most people miss. You are not simply trying to change your reality. You are changing the person who interacts with that reality. That is why the same opportunity can appear twice, and the first time you ignore it, while the second time you recognize it immediately. The opportunity may not have changed. You changed, and suddenly, the door looks different. The path feels different. The future feels possible. But here's the truth. You do not need to force the shift. You need to become aware of the patterns that have been keeping you in the same place. The fear you keep calling logic. The hesitation you keep calling patience. The old identity you keep calling just who I am. Because sometimes the biggest barrier between you and your next chapter is not the world outside you. It is the story you keep repeating inside yourself. And maybe that is why certain things have been falling apart. Maybe the silence after certain relationships is not punishment. Maybe the closed door is not rejection. Maybe the uncertainty is not proof that you are lost. Maybe you are standing at a threshold. And thresholds feel strange because you can no longer live comfortably in the old place, but you cannot fully see the new place yet. That space can feel empty. It can feel lonely. It can make you question everything. But what if that empty space is actually where your next identity is being formed? Viral line. Your reality begins to shift when the version of you that expected less finally stops making the decisions. So breathe. Look at your life differently for just a moment. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not being forgotten. You may simply be reaching the point where the old pattern can no longer hold you. And in the next moment, we are going deeper, because there is one hidden principle behind every real shift. And once you understand it, you may never look at your choices, your timing, or your future in exactly the same way again. Now let us go deeper, because there is something you need to understand before you can recognize a real shift. Your reality is not only shaped by what happens to you, it is also shaped by what you repeatedly expect, choose, notice, and believe is possible for you. Think about how many times you have walked into a room and immediately felt something was different. Nothing obvious had changed. The walls were the same. The people were the same. The place was the same. But you were different. And because you were different, you noticed things you had never noticed before. That is the hidden power of perception. Your mind constantly filters the world around you. It decides what deserves your attention, what feels important, and what gets ignored. So imagine that your life is like a massive field filled with possible paths. You cannot walk every path. You cannot see every opportunity. You cannot hear every conversation. You have to choose. And your internal state influences which direction you keep moving toward. This is why two people can experience the same difficult situation and walk away with completely different futures. One person sees an ending. Another sees an opening. One sees rejection. Another sees redirection. One says, "This always happens to me." The other asks, "What is this trying to teach me?" The event may be identical. The meaning is not. And that meaning changes what happens next. Now listen carefully. This does not mean you can simply think about something and magically force the universe to give it to you. Reality is more complicated than that. But your thoughts influence your emotions. Your emotions influence your behavior. Your behavior creates patterns, and patterns influence the direction of your life. That chain is powerful. It means the shift may begin long before anyone else can see it. It begins with a decision, a quiet decision. Sometimes nobody knows you made it. You simply wake up one morning and realize, I cannot keep doing this. You stop chasing someone who keeps making you question your worth. You stop shrinking yourself to make other people comfortable. You stop waiting for permission. You stop treating your fear like a command. And something changes. Not outside you. Inside you. At first, it may feel almost invisible. But then you make a different choice. Then another. Then another. And suddenly, months later, you look back and realize your entire direction changed from a decision nobody else even noticed. That is how powerful small internal shifts can become. And here comes the strange part. Sometimes your new reality feels uncomfortable before it feels exciting. Why? Because your old identity knows how to survive in familiar circumstances. Your new identity does not. The old version of you knows the old fears, the old habits, the old excuses, the old limits. But the emerging version of you is walking into territory it has never experienced before. That uncertainty can feel like danger, even when it is actually growth. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast desert just before sunrise. Behind you is everything you already know. Ahead of you is a horizon you cannot fully see. You could turn around. The familiar path would still be there. But something inside you knows. You cannot keep walking backward and expect a different destination. So you take one step, then another. And with every step, the horizon becomes clearer. That is the shift. Not one magical moment where everything becomes perfect, but a series of moments where you stop choosing the old reality. And here's what no one tells you. The moment you stop feeding an old pattern, it may become louder before it becomes weaker. The doubt may increase. The fear may speak louder. The temptation to return may become stronger. You may suddenly question whether you made the right decision. Do not mistake that resistance for failure. Sometimes resistance is simply the old pattern realizing it is losing control. You are ready for something different. But something different requires something different from you. Different boundaries, different choices, different standards, different courage. And perhaps most importantly, because you do not need to know every step before taking the first one. You only need enough clarity to take the next honest step. That is where your power begins. The shift does not begin when your world changes. It begins when you stop being the same person inside the world. So if something in your life feels uncertain right now, do not immediately assume you are lost. Pause. Breathe. Ask yourself, what old pattern am I finally ready to release? Because the answer to that question may reveal more about your next chapter than any prediction ever could. And now, we are about to reach the part where this becomes even more powerful. Because understanding the shift is one thing, but learning how to recognize the moment you are actually standing inside it, that changes everything. Now listen, there is a moment that comes before every major change. It is usually quiet. So quiet that you may not even recognize it at first. Nothing dramatic happens. No lightning strikes. No giant sign appears in the sky. Instead, something inside you simply becomes impossible to ignore. You start noticing the patterns. You notice how certain conversations leave you drained. You notice how often you say yes when you really mean no. You notice how many dreams you have postponed because you were waiting to feel ready. And then one day, you catch yourself. You realize that the life you keep asking for may require you to stop protecting the version of yourself that was built for your old life. That realization can feel uncomfortable because your old identity has been with you for a long time. It helped you survive disappointment. It taught you how to avoid rejection. It taught you to expect less so you would not feel hurt when things went wrong. Maybe it even convinced you that wanting more was unrealistic. But here's the truth. A belief can protect you and limit you at the same time. You can be grateful for who you were and still decide not to remain that person. That is where the real threshold appears. Imagine standing in front of two doors. One door leads back to everything familiar. The same habits, the same fears, the same excuses, The same explanations. The other door does not promise comfort. It only promises possibility. You cannot see what is behind it. You cannot guarantee that everything will work out. You only know one thing. You cannot keep standing between both doors forever. At some point, you have to choose. And that choice does not have to be dramatic. It can be as simple as waking up and deciding that you will no longer speak to yourself like an enemy. It can be applying for the opportunity you thought was too far above you. It can be ending the habit that keeps pulling you backward. It can be starting the project you have been delaying. It can be forgiving yourself for something you have carried for years. Small choices can create large direction changes. Think about a ship crossing an ocean. A tiny adjustment in its direction may seem meaningless at the beginning, but after hundreds of miles, the destination can be completely different. Your life can work the same way. A single decision may look insignificant today, but repeated decisions create momentum. Momentum creates a pattern, and eventually, that pattern becomes your new normal. This is why you should pay attention to the small moments. The moment you choose discipline instead of another excuse. The moment you choose peace instead of another argument. The moment you choose action instead of another hour of doubt. Those moments are not random. They are votes for the person you are becoming. And something strange happens when enough of those votes point in the same direction. Your environment begins to respond differently. You speak differently. You walk differently. You notice different opportunities. You attract different conversations. You stop tolerating things that once felt normal. Suddenly, people may even ask, "What happened to you?" And you may not know how to explain it, because nothing happened overnight. You simply stopped returning to the old version of yourself. But here's the deeper question. What happens when your external reality has not changed yet? What do you do when you have made the decision internally, but the evidence has not appeared? This is where many people give up. They say, "I tried." They say, "Nothing changed." They return to the old pattern because they cannot see immediate results. But growth often has a hidden stage. A seed does not look impressive while it is underground. Nothing appears to be happening. But underneath the surface, everything is happening. Roots are forming. Structure is developing. Preparation is taking place. Your life can have seasons like that too. There may be periods where the outside looks completely unchanged. Do not confuse silence with absence. Do not confuse delay with denial. And do not confuse the lack of immediate evidence with the lack of progress. Sometimes the biggest shift is happening where nobody can see it. You are becoming someone who can handle the reality you once prayed for. And that requires preparation. Because imagine receiving everything you wanted while still carrying the same fears, habits, and self-doubt. Would you even know how to hold it? Would you protect it? Would you believe you deserved it? Would you sabotage it because it felt unfamiliar? That is why the inner shift matters. You are not simply waiting for a new reality. You are becoming capable of living inside it. Sometimes the universe does not delay the door. It prepares the person who is finally ready to walk through it. So if you are in that strange period where the old life no longer feels right, but the new life has not fully appeared, stay with the process. You may be closer than you think. And now we reach an even deeper question. If your inner world can change your direction, then what happens when you deliberately change the signal you keep sending through your thoughts, choices, and actions? Because that is where the idea of resonance begins. And once you understand resonance, the entire idea of a quantum shift becomes much easier to understand. Now let us talk about resonance. Because this is where the idea becomes much more personal. You have probably noticed that some places make you feel calm the moment you enter them, while other places make you want to leave almost immediately. Some people make you feel like you can be completely yourself. Others make you question every word you say. Some decisions bring a strange sense of peace, even when they are difficult. And some choices look perfect on paper. Yet something inside you keeps saying, "This is not for me." That inner response is worth paying attention to. Not because every feeling is automatically a message, but because your repeated patterns can reveal what your conscious mind has been trying to ignore. Think of resonance like two instruments responding to the same note. When one string vibrates, another string tuned to a similar frequency can begin to respond. Your life has patterns like that. What you repeatedly focus on becomes easier to notice. What you repeatedly practice becomes easier to do. What you repeatedly accept begins to feel normal. And what feels normal eventually becomes the life you stop questioning. That is why changing your reality often begins with changing what you repeatedly reinforce. If you constantly tell yourself, "I am not ready," you begin searching for reasons to wait. If you constantly tell yourself, "Nothing ever works for me," you begin noticing every disappointment while ignoring every possibility. But if you begin asking, "What can I do with what I have right now?" your attention starts moving in a different direction. The circumstances may not change instantly, but your response changes. And your response creates new behavior. New behavior creates new outcomes. New outcomes create new evidence. And new evidence can change what you believe is possible. That is how a shift gains momentum. It is not about pretending that problems do not exist. It is about refusing to let every problem define your future. Because you have probably had moments when one unexpected event changed everything. A conversation, a meeting, a decision, a message, a chance opportunity. At the time, it may have looked small, but later, you realized it became a turning point. The important question is, why were you ready to recognize that moment? Maybe because you had already changed internally. You were paying attention differently. You were asking different questions. You were willing to walk through a door you would have ignored 6 months earlier. And that is why awareness matters. Sometimes the opportunity is not new. You are new. You finally have the eyes to recognize it. Now imagine your life as a huge city at night. There are thousands of windows glowing, thousands of roads, thousands of people moving toward different destinations. You cannot enter every building. You cannot walk every road. You have to choose where your attention goes. Your attention is a form of direction, and wherever your attention repeatedly goes, your energy, time, and decisions tend to follow. This is why protecting your attention matters. If you spend every day consuming fear, fear becomes familiar. If you spend every day comparing yourself, comparison becomes familiar. If you spend every day imagining failure, failure becomes easier to expect. But when you deliberately create space for learning, action, gratitude, discipline, and possibility, you begin building a different internal environment. Again, this does not mean ignoring reality. It means deciding which part of reality gets to control your next move. And here's the part that can change everything. You do not need to feel powerful before you act. Sometimes action comes first. Confidence comes later. You do not need to believe you can walk the entire road. You only need enough courage to take the next step. That step may feel tiny. But remember, a direction is created by repeated movement. One step, then another, then another. Eventually, you look around and realize you are nowhere near where you started. That is a quantum shift in the most practical sense. A change in direction that becomes enormous because you kept moving. And perhaps you have already begun. Maybe that is why your old habits feel uncomfortable now. Maybe that is why certain conversations no longer satisfy you. Maybe that is why you keep feeling pulled towards something you cannot fully explain. You are noticing the difference between what feels familiar and what feels aligned with who you are becoming. But be careful, because the next stage can be confusing. When you begin changing internally, you may start expecting the outside world to change immediately. And when it does not, doubt can return. You may think the shift failed. You may wonder if you imagined everything. You may even return to the old version of yourself simply because it feels easier. This is the test. Not whether you can change for one day, but whether you can remain committed when the evidence is still incomplete. The moment you stop demanding proof before taking the next step, your future finally gets room to surprise you. So do not measure your transformation only by what has already appeared. Measure it by the choices you are making now. Are you responding differently? Are you thinking differently? Are you protecting your peace differently? Are you taking yourself more seriously? Are you willing to choose the unfamiliar path when the familiar one keeps leading you to the same place? If the answer is yes, something is already moving. And now, there is one final piece we need to understand before this picture becomes complete. Because changing your internal signal is powerful. But there is another force that determines whether the shift becomes a temporary feeling or a completely different direction for your life. That force is action. And once you understand how awareness, resonance, and action work together, you will finally see why some changes disappear after a few days, while others become impossible to reverse. Now we come to the part that most people overlook. Action. Because you can understand yourself deeply, you can visualize a new future. You can repeat affirmations. You can feel inspired. But eventually, reality asks you one question. What are you going to do differently? That question changes everything. Because a thought can open a door, but action is what makes you walk through it. You may know exactly what needs to change. You may know which habit is holding you back. You may know which conversation you have been avoiding. You may know which dream keeps returning to your mind. And still, you can remain in the same place. Why? Because knowing is not the same as moving. Imagine standing at the edge of a river. You can study the water. You can imagine reaching the other side. You can picture the life waiting beyond it. But until you take the first step, you are still standing on the same shore. That is where many people become trapped. They keep waiting for certainty. They want the perfect sign, the perfect timing, the perfect amount of confidence, the perfect opportunity. But what if certainty is not supposed to come first? What if clarity appears because you move? Think about a dark road at night. Your headlights do not show you the entire road. They only show you enough distance to continue. And somehow, that is enough. You drive forward. The next part becomes visible. Then the next. Then the next. Your life can work the same way. You do not need to see your entire future. You need enough courage to move toward the next honest step. Maybe that step is making the phone call. Maybe it is starting the project. Maybe it is learning the skill. Maybe it is walking away from something that keeps destroying your peace. Maybe it is finally saying, I want more from my life. And meaning it. That is action. Not dramatic. Not magical. Just real. But here's what makes it powerful. Every action sends information back to your mind. When you take a difficult step and survive it, your mind learns something. I can do hard things. When you speak honestly and realize the world does not collapse, you learn something. I can be honest. When you try something new and fail, you learn something. Failure is not the end. When you take another step after disappointment, you learn something even deeper. I am not controlled by what happened to me. These experiences change your internal model of reality. And once that model changes, your behavior starts changing naturally. You stop asking, can I? And you start asking, how? That is a powerful shift. Because can I looks for permission. How looks for a path. And once you begin looking for a path, you start seeing possibilities that were invisible before. This is why your next chapter may not require a completely different life. It may require a different relationship with the life you already have. You may already have the tools, the time, the ability to learn, the ability to begin, the ability to choose. But you have been waiting for some external event to give you permission to use them. Stop waiting. Not because everything is guaranteed, but because your future cannot be built by decisions you keep postponing. And there is another important piece. Action must be aligned. Do not act simply because you are afraid of falling behind. Do not chase every opportunity because you fear missing out. Do not destroy your peace trying to prove yourself. A real shift does not mean doing more and more. Sometimes the most powerful action is stopping. Stopping the endless comparison. Stopping the need to impress everyone. Stopping the habit of explaining yourself to people who have already decided not to understand you. Stopping the cycle of saying yes when your entire body is asking for no. Sometimes your next reality begins with what you finally refuse to continue. Think about a door that has been locked for years. You keep pushing against it. Harder. Harder. Nothing happens. Then you step back and notice another door beside you that was never locked. You simply never looked at it. That is what awareness can do. It changes where you push. It changes where you look. It changes what you consider possible. And suddenly, the path that seemed impossible is no longer the path you are taking. This is why your reality can feel as though it shifted suddenly. From the outside, people may think it happened overnight. But you know the truth. The shift began long before the results appeared. It began with the first thought, then the first decision, then the first uncomfortable action, then another, until one day, the new direction became stronger than the old one. Your future is not waiting for you to become fearless. It is waiting for you to move while fear is still there. So if you have been waiting for the perfect moment, this may be your reminder. You do not need to transform your entire life tonight. Choose one thing, one decision, one action, one habit, one step, and make it real. Because a shift that remains only inside your imagination is still only a possibility. But a shift that enters your choices can become a new direction. And now we are approaching the final piece, the part where you bring everything together. Because awareness shows you the pattern. Resonance changes what you notice. Action changes what you create. But there is one final question. How do you keep the shift alive long enough for it to become your new normal? That is where the deepest transformation begins. Now bring everything together, because you have reached the point where the shift stops being an idea and becomes a way of living. You have seen how awareness changes what you notice. You have seen how your repeated thoughts and choices create patterns. You have seen how action turns an internal decision into an external direction. But there is one final piece. Consistency. Because one powerful moment can inspire you, but repeated choices transform you. You may have experienced this before. You watch something that changes your perspective. For a few hours, you feel unstoppable. You believe everything is possible. You feel like a completely different person. Then the next morning comes. The old routine returns. The same doubts appear. The same distractions call your attention. And slowly, the feeling disappears. Why does that happen? Because inspiration creates a spark. But repetition creates a new pattern. Think of a path through a forest. If nobody walks it, the path slowly disappears. But every time you walk the same direction, the path becomes clearer. Your mind works in a similar way. Every time you choose courage over avoidance, you strengthen courage. Every time you choose discipline over comfort, you strengthen discipline. Every time you choose your future over an old habit, you strengthen the identity of the person you are becoming. You are literally practicing your new reality. And this is where something beautiful happens. Eventually, what once required enormous effort starts becoming natural. The boundary you were afraid to set becomes normal. The habit you struggled to build becomes part of your routine. The dream you were afraid to begin becomes something you work on every day. The person you once thought you could never become starts looking back at you from the mirror. Not because reality suddenly became perfect, because you became different inside it. And perhaps that is the real meaning of a quantum shift. Not escaping reality, but changing the way you meet it. You stop waiting for life to prove that you are worthy. You stop asking everyone else to confirm your direction. You stop needing every door to open before you take the next step. You begin trusting yourself enough to move. And that changes your relationship with uncertainty. Uncertainty used to mean something might go wrong. Now it can mean something new might be possible. That is a completely different way of living. But there is one thing I want you to remember. Do not turn this into another reason to blame yourself. If your life is difficult right now, it does not mean you simply thought wrong. Real life contains things you cannot control. Loss, unexpected problems, other people's choices, circumstances you never asked for. A powerful mindset does not deny those things. It gives you a place to stand while facing them. You cannot control every wave, but you can learn how to move with the water. You cannot control every door, but you can choose which doors you keep knocking on. You cannot control the entire future, but you can influence what you do today. And that is enough. More than enough. So take a breath and ask yourself one final question. If you stopped living from fear, what would you choose next? Not 10 years from now. Not someday. Not when everything becomes perfect. What would you choose next? Maybe you already know. Maybe the answer appeared in your mind before you finished the question. Pay attention to that. Because sometimes your next step does not arrive as a loud voice. It arrives quietly. A thought, a feeling, a decision you keep postponing, a truth you keep trying to avoid, a dream that refuses to disappear. And maybe that is the signal, not a magical prediction, not a promise that everything will happen exactly the way you want. A signal that something inside you is ready to move. So move. Slowly if you need to. Carefully if you need to. With fear if you have to. But move. Because you do not need to know exactly where the road ends to take the next step. And remember, the old version of you may keep asking for proof. The new version of you learns to create evidence through action. You do not wait until you feel confident. You act. And confidence grows. You do not wait until you feel ready. You begin. And readiness develops. You do not wait for reality to change before you change. You change the choices you make. And allow reality to respond in its own time. Reality does not need you to become someone else. It needs you to stop abandoning the person you are becoming. So tonight, or tomorrow morning, take a few quiet minutes. Put your phone away. Take a slow breath. Ask yourself what pattern you are ready to leave behind. Then ask what new pattern you are ready to build. And finally, choose one action that proves your answer. Not a huge action, a real one. Because this is how the shift becomes real. Awareness, choice, action, consistency. Again, awareness, choice, action, consistency. And somewhere along that path, you may look around and realize something extraordinary. The world did not suddenly become a different place. You became different within it. You notice different doors. You make different choices. You respond differently. You expect differently. You move differently. And because you move differently, your life begins moving in a different direction. That is the shift, not an escape from reality, but a new relationship with it. And if you can remember only one thing from everything you heard today, remember this. You are not waiting for your life to begin. You are already inside the moment that can change its direction. The next choice matters. The next step matters. The next thought matters. So do not underestimate the small decision you make after this video ends. It may look ordinary. It may feel insignificant. But every new reality begins somewhere. Sometimes, it begins with one person taking one honest step and refusing to turn back.